If I show up at a certain person's office or in the bank, what are you here for? But when I go home, nobody says, hey, why are you here? Home is the organic, natural place of a person. They say home is also a place where when everybody says no to you, they have to let you in.
What is home? Yes, we have our homeland Israel, and yes, we have homes throughout the diaspora. But our current reality is complex. Israel's at war, and anti-Semitism is rising around the world. So what does that mean for us? What does that mean for this question of home? Join me, Izzy, as I speak with Israeli and diaspora Jewry to better understand this new complex reality and unpack where we put ourselves in this physical and spiritual war. This is the My Israel Narrative podcast. Everyone, so today we are very fortunate to be sitting here with Rabbi Jacobson, who is, it says in your bio, but I was going to say it before I read your bio, one of the most sought out speakers in the Jewish world, and also understand speaks to the non-Jewish world, really all over. I personally heard you speak in Yerushalayim. I was just telling you a little over a year ago, and it was one of the most impactful, powerful shiurim talks that I heard, and a lot of people that tell me that they listen to you, they just say it gives them so much comfort, so much tachama, so much strength. So I feel very fortunate to be sitting here to have this conversation, especially in these times. And hopefully, like I said, we can kind of just have an open, raw, honest conversation. But as always, I like to just kick it off. If you'd like to share a little bit, anything that we should know about you, about something maybe you're working on right now, interesting fact, a thought you had today, just feel free to kind of kick it off with that.
Well, thank you, Izzy, for the privilege and the invitation and for your kind and gracious introductory remarks. I learned something this morning before my prayers that was very, very powerful for me. And if you want, I'll share it. It was basically, we're finishing now in the Torah reading. We're completing now the book of Genesis, the book of Bereshit. This week, the entire Jewish world in Israel and across the diaspora will be reading the last biblical portion of Genesis, known as Vayichi, which describes the death of Jacob and Joseph. And we go into the book of Exodus, which begins the story of the Egyptian bondage, the first massive Jewish collective exile. And one of the teachings I was reading was the uniqueness of Joseph versus his brothers, why there was such a misunderstanding in the first Jewish family. And the reason is, it's very, very powerful spiritual idea from one of the greatest Hasidic masters. And he says that all the brothers of Joseph, just like the patriarchs, they were shepherds. They all chose the vocation of being shepherds. And the reason is, because when you're a shepherd, you're completely segregated from the hustle and bustle and the pressures of the daily grind of life. They were not involved in commerce, not even farming, because that takes a lot of work. Rather, they would spend the day with their sheep, with their flock. And as their sheep were pasturing and getting the nurture and the food and the water they need, they could sit in intimacy and meditation in complete oneness with their Creator. Joseph, their brother, was completely opposite. He already dreamt of success. And ultimately, he would go down and he would become the prime minister of the superpower of the time, in which he would be completely enmeshed in worldly affairs. He wasn't an isolated shepherd living in nature, looking at the heavens, enjoying the water and the landscape, and just connecting with his soul and the cosmos and the energy of the world. But he was enmeshed and immersed in all of the pressures of what it is to run the economy of the most powerful country in the ancient world, Egypt. So for the brothers, it was very hard to relate to him from a Jewish perspective. How can you be part of the Jewish spiritual tradition when your entire trajectory of life represents a completely different vision? What they didn't understand was that Joseph's unique power was that even as he was completely immersed in the daily pressures of life, he could still retain his absolute intimacy with the divine without compromising his values and his soul. He had that power, that fortitude, that spiritual clarity to be fully present in the world and yet completely not defined by the darkness not pulled down by the externalities and by the deceptions and by the fakeness and by anything that really takes you away from the true clarity of your inner soul. So that was extremely moving and emotional to be able to see that, because I think in our own lives, we all have this struggle, especially in today's day when we're pulled so many different directions. You just pick up your phone in the morning or at any point. There's first of all 100 clips waiting for you. So at least if it would be my clips, not so bad. Some clips are not always on the same, I would say, have the same spiritual message. And it's so easy to be pulled in, and then darkness defines us rather than light. Instead of being leaders, we become victims to whatever the next clip or the next WhatsApp or the next piece of news or the next message, lures us into. That ability to be able to be present in the world, hear the news, be connected to our brothers and sisters in Israel and the world over, and yet completely anchored in who we really are, I think is something for me that is extremely important and very vital for us to fulfill our mission during these times. Leaders cannot be defined by others. They have to set the agenda. If not, they just become victims of whatever is happening around them, and it's not always to the benefit of our people.
No, what you're saying is, it's making me think, maybe it's a little excuse I use for myself. But I was explaining to you, so I was living in Israel the past 3 years. And a lot of times we say when you're in Israel, you feel the Kedusha, you feel the Shem, you feel, even if you're not religious, you just feel this clarity, this light that you're speaking of so much more easily.
Yeah.
And since being back in New York, especially in a time like this, I kind of have this rhetoric in my head of, well, because it's just harder here. So I just, I'm going to feel more darkness and more whatever. And I had it. But I guess my question is, how do we really hold on? How do we bring, and it's crazy because people here, I guess right now people are looking at Israel and they're thinking, well, there's so much darkness there, and there is. But we also know that what's happening there is so immense, is so, like, the light that's being unearthed is so great that it really is trumping the darkness in a lot of ways.
And it's fascinating. Recently, there's a tremendous quest for Aliyah. Many Jews,
I have a lot of questions about that.
Now are looking to go to Israel. It's beyond. It's incredible. But I think you're addressing one of the key issues of Jewish history. It's back to Joseph and his brothers. Joseph's brothers had the spiritual luxury and the privilege of living with their father Jacob in the Holy Land. Joseph was sent into exile not by his will. It's not what he chose. His brothers threw him into a pit and sold him into slavery, and he ended up in prison, and then he ended up becoming the prime minister of Egypt. But the power of Joseph was that he understood at every step of the way that he was on a mission. He was not placed there by mistake. This was a divine mission, clearly orchestrated in order for him to ultimately be able to save the world from famine and to save his own family from famine. And that is the uniqueness of Joseph. In fact, there's a very moving moment at the end of Genesis, this week's in the portion of Vayechi. Jacob meets Joseph at the end of his life, and he blesses his two children who were born in Egypt. And he brings out, Jacob says, these are the two boys who were born in Egypt before I arrived. And therefore they have a special place in my heart, and he treats them as his own children. And basically what he's saying is, these are the only two kids to be born in exile without a Jewish environment, without a Jewish family, without a Jewish infrastructure. All the other grandchildren were raised at the bosom of their grandfather, Jacob, who was, of course, the son of Isaac, the grandson of Abraham. But these two boys, Joseph's boys, Menashe and Ephraim, were born on the soil of Egypt before Jacob arrived, before the brothers arrived. And Jacob understood the power of that, because these two boys demonstrated the ability of the Jewish people to succeed even on foreign soil. Rather than assimilating, they could remain anchored. And I think the fact that today there are 6.6 million Jews living in Israel, let's understand the power of that, because in a few years, God willing, half of the Jewish people will be living in our homeland, in our eternal homeland. That is something that has not occurred since the days of the first temple. Since the days of the first temple, you're talking about thousands of years ago. During Solomon's time, the entire Jewish world was living in Israel. But afterwards, shortly afterwards, there was an exile. The 10 tribes were exiled, and then the other tribes were exiled. So we're dealing with a history literally in the making, that almost half of the Jewish people today are living in the homeland. How did this miracle happen after 2,000 years of being dispersed and persecuted? And today, millions of Jews are living in Israel, surrounded by sworn enemies. The Medrash compares us to a lamb encircled by 70 wolves, one lamb by 70 wolves. But we're there, and we're there to stay forever. So people often don't understand what contributed to that. What contributed to that is the story of Joseph. Joseph represented the ability that wherever Jews were, they never forgot their roots. They always remained anchored in their faith, in their history, in their tradition, in their God, and in their homeland. That was the example that Joseph set for all of Jewish history. That's why we are all of us living in America, wherever we're living, are all students and disciples of Joseph if we want to remain Jewish. And who doesn't today?
So I'm hearing kind of two things, like in speaking to this idea of knowing our mission. Because right now, so you mentioned some people are thinking, let me pick up and make Aliyah. I want to take this Jewishness, this who I am, and go be in our eternal homeland. And many others who, for many, multitude of reasons, are not making that choice, can't make that choice. So what would you say, what's their mission? Where if we can't right now be placing ourselves in our eternal homeland?
I'll tell you, it's a great question. And everybody has to ask themselves, really, where do I belong? Where does God want me? On Simchas Torah, 5784, October 7th, 2023, I believe, every single Jew living in the world was drafted to war. Every one of us was mobilized. Yes, there are those holy, brave soldiers who were drafted to the front lines and are sacrificing. I'm going to try not to cry too much, and are sacrificing their lives every day for the Jewish people and for Israel and for really all innocent people in the whole world. Because what Hamas did in the southern Israel, they would like to be a promo act and ultimately, bring it to a theater near you. Israel is the big enemy, but every American is an enemy. Every Westerner is an enemy. Every infidel is an enemy. So there are those of us who are mobilized to the front lines, but every Jew in Israel, of course, but also abroad, was mobilized into the war because the Jewish people are at war. The question we have to ask ourselves is, what division I was mobilized to? Every army has many divisions. Some are doctors and nurses and chefs. Some are the generals and commanders who strategize. Some are the foot soldiers. Some are involved in PR. And then there are those who give the army the morale. But every single one of us is in a war, and we have to ask ourselves, ask not what my people can do for me. Ask not what your people can do for you. Ask what you can do for your people, what you can do for your homeland. And I think every single one of us, wherever we are, we have our sphere of influence. And that sphere of influence must be utilized in the maximum way to be able to stand up and to fight the war we need to fight. The first is the spiritual war. The spiritual war, that's the greatest Jewish weapon because we're here. The fact is, 4,000 years later, we are still here. And the reason we're still here is because of our spiritual weapon. Our spiritual weapon is the study of Torah and the celebration of mitzvot and our emunah, our faith, and our unity, our ahavat Yisrael. So every single Jew who immerses themselves in strengthening and fortifying their spiritual core through Torah, mitzvahs, faith, prayer, unity, are directly contributing to the war effort of the Jewish people. We need strong, proud Jews physically, but equally, emotionally, ideologically, spiritually. When we are at our home front, those of us educating our children, inspiring our students, every one of them is mobilized to the Jewish triumph, to the Jewish journey towards victory. We don't underestimate these types of activities. It was already Jacob, talking about Jacob, who told his son thousands of years ago, he said, as long as the voice of Jacob will remain powerful, the hands of Esau will not be able to defeat him. So we don't underestimate the voice of Jacob. That's the voice of prayer, the voice of love, the voice of moral clarity, the voice of Torah study, the voice of Jewish unity, the voice of faith. Then there is, of course, all those of us who can contribute in many other ways, whether it is leadership, education, supporting Israel, supporting Israel in the United States, supporting our brothers and sisters back home, financially, morally, spiritually, emotionally, every possible way. But every single Jew today has to ask themselves, what is my mission today to be able to be an indispensable part in making sure that the light prevails over the darkness, that the good defeats the evil, because this is a global confrontation between good and evil. And as always, the Jews are the miners, canaries of history. We are the canaries. What's happening in Israel is a little, not so little, is a reflection of essentially a very, very global struggle. And this is the time for good people to rise with resolve and resilience.
Do we really expect that? Because isn't there also idea in Judaism, I've heard this come up a few times, especially recently, that like the Jewish people, like we stand alone. Like it's not necessarily about trying to get people to see our side. It's just about us doing good for the sake of us doing good. Like at the end of the day, and I ask this because I think what I'm seeing is a lot of emphasis on break down the shekers, break down the lies, tell people they're wrong. And it feels almost, it's sometimes like a
misplaced
energy, use of energy.
It's a very, very good point. I think sometimes debating individuals who are not really looking for truth is a waste of time and a waste of energy.
Right.
And will simply drive you crazy and make you feel so angry and full of despair. It's simply not worth your time and energy. Somebody who's looking for truth, yes, by all means. If you're looking for truth, right, I will talk to you for hours. But if you already have an agenda set in your mind, you hate Israel, you hate Jews, or you've been brainwashed and indoctrinated, what am I going to waste my time with you? That's right. Very important to understand. Another important thing to understand, though, is that there are good people. In America, there are many good people. Across the world, there are many good people. And they all need and want and are craving to hear a clear moral Jewish voice based on our history, based on truth, based on authenticity, and based on moral clarity. The good people in the world are craving for Israel to be stronger than ever, even when sometimes they give lip service to various countries just to flatter them and appease them and make believe they're pressuring Israel. Deep down, most good people in the world want Israel to go all the way because that makes them safer. Right. Remember, Islamic fundamentalism is a danger to every human being who wants to live in freedom around the globe, whether you're in Australia or you're in London or you're in Paris or you're living in Los Angeles or Manhattan. So any good and normal, rational person understands Israel is fighting a war for the whole world. And that comes to the last point, and that is one of the greatest mistakes that Israeli leaders have made and Jews have made over the years is we wait for the world to tell us what is moral and what is not moral, when it's really the opposite. The world is actually waiting for the Jewish people to rise up and to demonstrate what morality is. Nobody has to teach the Jewish people about morality. We're the ones who brought morality to the world at Sinai. The 10 Commandments come from the Torah. The idea of good versus evil comes from the Torah. The idea that every human being was created in the image of God and their life is sacred. That comes from the Jewish people. We know that life is sacred. This is what we've been fighting for literally 4,000 years. This is what we've been fighting for, that life is sacred, that every person is sacred. The world needs Jewish people to be strong and resilient and be obsessed with goodness and allergic to evil. This is exactly what the world needs. It needs strong, powerful Jews who don't allow compassion to become literally a way of helping evil survive.
It sounds like in all of your saying, it's like Israel is almost just like the physical manifestation of what we're supposed to be bringing to the world. Like that is like the epicenter of this. So
Israel is the epicenter of the world. The world knows. Everybody calls it the Holy Land. The Holy Land. Right? Everybody knows it. The only people who sometimes don't know it are the Jews. Nobody thinks Israel is a regular country. Only Jews try to say, "Oh, we're a regular country." Nobody thinks the Jewish people are regular people. Only we do. We're trying to convince ourselves for thousands of years that we're a regular people. Now look at October 7th. In Syria, 500,000 people were murdered. 500,000. You know how many children? Tens of thousands of children. I didn't see one demonstration. And you know what happened in Darfur? Do you know what happened in the Congo? Do you know what happened in Chechnya? I don't hear any demonstrations whatsoever. What happened in Jordan? People don't even realize how many of their own people Hamas tortures and murders
Yeah.
constantly. Who cares? Who demonstrates? Israelis, the Jews care more about the children in Gaza than the Hamasniks. And so many foolish people in the world are busy condemning Israel to protect the people in Gaza who their own people want to murder them, want to slaughter them. So it's so important for Jews to realize what is happening here. The world responds to Jews in a way that it does not respond to any other people. And the reason is because we were chosen by the Creator to be a moral light unto the nations. And what we need to do is shine it, and shine it with resolve and clarity and fearlessness. And you know what happens? The world respects you. Everybody respects you. And people who hate you will hate you regardless. Look now, Israelis were butchered and burned and murdered. You would think they would get the sympathy of peace-loving people, at least for a few days. They're being condemned. The atrocities were blamed on them. 32 universities in the US, places of higher education, places of enlightenment, places we spend hundreds of thousands of dollars to send our children, apparently to get a rigorous education and to teach them how to think. And it's in these places where you have the greatest form of indoctrination, maybe in human history, compared to the Stalin's communism indoctrination or Hitler's indoctrination, where suddenly victims who their entire crime is they're trying to live in peace, they became the perpetrators. And the perpetrators who would like to murder every single Jew became the victims. We have to realize this and stop selling our souls.
What's giving me like a lot of strength and hearing your words is I think sometimes recently I've been hearing a lot of this rhetoric of bring the light and be positive and be strong and wear your Judaism on your sleeve. And kind of sometimes I'm like, come on, like, are we just going to ignore what's happened? Like, I don't understand. Like, we're just going to keep, just put on a smile and we're going to poo-poo it away. But it's not. It's really this notion of like, when we own who we are, and I've experienced this in my own life, I'm sure everyone's experienced it in their lives, when you own a decision, when you own something that is, so then everyone backs down. It's like, oh, wow. Oh, yeah, that's really you. And like
Everybody
the fact that we
backs down.
don't,
Everybody
yeah,
backs down. And the people who hate you and want to fight you will not back down, even if you appease them for 1,000,000
right,
years. Churchill
right.
said appeasement is feeding the alligator in the hope that he will eat you last.
Well,
And that's what we've been doing. That's what we've been doing. We've been feeding alligators and crocodiles and keeping them tame, hoping they're going to eat us last. And now they came to eat us. Will we allow ourselves and our children to be eaten? And I'm very fearful for the Jewish people because we have unbelievable resilience and strength, and it comes from a supernatural core. I'm afraid because we have leaders who sometimes don't deserve their citizens. It's painful to say this. Some of the leaders in Israel don't always deserve their citizens. The Jewish people are lions. Nobody has defeated us. And the reason is because we are rooted and anchored in a place of eternity. And when we represent that to the world, everybody is in awe and in reverence. This is exactly what we're supposed to be. The voice of moral clarity, the voice for goodness, the voice for truth, for authenticity. Everybody is dying for it, craving for it, yearning for it. Instead, what we do often is we duck, we become lame, and we try to convince everybody that we're just regular people and we just want peace and we're just this democracy in the Middle East, this only democracy in the Middle East, not realizing that for our enemies, the word democracy in the Middle East is the worst thing.
yeah.
The worst thing you could be in the Middle East is a democracy. All they want is to destroy, and we're busy screaming, no, we respect you, we'll give you more, we'll give you more, which means they could kill us more. So a shift of consciousness is so important. The shift of consciousness is not radical. It's not cruel. It's actually about the ultimate compassion. It's about truth. It's about knowing what is good and what is evil.
So I want to take it back for a moment. You mentioned that right now we have, or soon we hope we'll have half the Jewish people living in Eretz Yisrael. We speak about Eretz Yisrael as our homeland, as our eternal homeland. But what does that mean on a practical level right now? Does it mean like I'm here in New York trying to build a life somehow amidst all of this. What does that mean for me that Israel is my homeland? Is it somewhere I'm supposed to always dream of getting to again, or just have in my heart, have in my mind? Is it just to make me feel safe that I have it? Which that answer never satisfies me in the slightest. What's the point? What is this homeland that we're not living in
Excellent,
right now?
excellent question. And this question really defines Jewish history because remember, for 2,000 years, most Jews were not living in their homeland.
Right.
Throughout the generations after the destruction of the temple and the Dark Ages, the Middle Ages, there were always Jews in the Holy Land, but very few. Very few. Nachmanides, Ramban, lived in the 12th century, 12th, 13th century. And he left Spain and he went to Jerusalem.
Yeah.
And he says he could barely find a minyan in Jerusalem, barely find Jews. There were Jews throughout the land, but very few and very scattered and not organized and powerless, physically powerless. And yet they called it their homeland. And 3 times a day when Jews prayed, wherever they were, they faced the land of Israel, they faced Jerusalem. And they prayed every single day, bring us back home. In the Sabbath, Saturday prayers, they would say, we have been exiled because of our sins. We've been exiled from our land. They still called it our land, our homeland. And it's fascinating that in history, most of the great empires that took Israel, they tried to make it blossom because when the Jewish people owned it, it always blossomed. Today it's blossoming. It never did. It never demonstrated kindness to any other people. It remained the desert that it is. When the Jewish people live in Israel, it starts blossoming. They turn the desert into bloom. So it works both ways. There's a relationship. And I think really what it means is that the Jewish people's spiritual and historical roots literally exist in the land of Israel. It's like a tree. In this tree, even, for the tree to live, you can't detach it from its roots. The miracle of the Jewish people is that our tree, wherever it lived around the world, from Russia to Poland, Galicia to Western Europe, South America, North America, Australia, New Zealand, wherever it was, we were in Japan or in Africa or in Europe and Asia, our roots always remained in the Holy Land of Israel, and the Jewish people feel it. It's literally like your home, the home where you grew up in, right? Even when we get married, our father and mother remain our father and mother. Our brothers and sisters remain our brothers and sisters. But you're not living there. It's not your home. It may not be my physical home, but it's where my soul developed. And in this case, it may not be the home where I was born or I grew up in, but the soul of every Jew was molded and crafted on the streets of the Holy Land, by the patriarchs and the matriarchs, by our prophets and kings and judges and poets and sages and mystics and rabbis and tzaddikim and ordinary women and men who walked on that soil for thousands of years. They literally molded the DNA of the Jewish world. So wherever we are connected vertically and horizontally, spiritually speaking, with the Jewish people in Israel, beyond it being a haven of safety, and beyond the fact that after the Holocaust, we realize there's one place in the world that we are entitled to call home and that every Jew can become a citizen there. And that's critical and powerful and a great miracle. But beyond that, there is an essential connection. It's called between us and the land. It's called Eretz Yisrael. The land of Yisrael. We're called Bnei Yisrael, the children of Israel. Children. And it's very important because, I can have a friend and we can be close and then we separate and we move on. But if I'm a child, I can never separate from my parents. So Bnei Yisrael means we are children of Yisrael. There's something inseparable between Yisrael and the Jewish people, and that includes the land of Yisrael. And that's why what happens in that country affects every Jew, even thousands of kilometers and miles away. It's not only because I have family there or because I know the people. I may not know the people. It's not just because we happen to both be called Jews and we have ancestral roots. That's not what does it. Fine, you could feel bad. That's not what happens. Why are Jews in America not sleeping since October 7th? Why are people reciting Psalms around the clock? Why is everybody so addicted to find out the news in Israel? I don't have family in the south of Israel. I didn't know anybody personally in Kfar Aza or Be'eri. And yet we feel it's our brothers, our sisters, our children. Why? The answer is, if you're going to try to explain it rationally, you're not going to have an explanation. The answer is because the Jewish people are family. Our souls are one. We're all connected. We're all divinely connected for eternity. And what happens to you is happening to me. And what's happening to me is happening to you. We may not always be conscious of it, but that's the truth.
Well, so just I guess to end off on the note of this notion of home, if in a few words you could share just what home is for you.
They say that home is the place that you don't need a reason why you're going there, right? If I show up in your house, you're going to ask me, how can I help you? If I show up at a certain person's office or in the bank, what are you here for? But when I go home, nobody says, hey, why are you here? Home is the organic, natural place of a person. They say home is also a place where when everybody says no to you, they have to let you in. And I think in many ways that defines the home of the Jewish people. We don't need a reason to be there. This is the organic space where the Jewish soul individually and collectively blossoms. Exile is where we were sent because we had a mission there, but it's not the organic home of the Jewish people. Now, the fact is that many Jews still live outside of the land of Israel. And I think for everybody just to say goodbye and run to Israel, maybe for some people it's the right thing, but it's not responsible for many people because, you know, as my teacher used to teach, if you're in a leadership position in America or in other places, and there's many Jews who are dependent on you, it's very nice that you want to go spiritually perfect yourself, but it may be the wrong thing. But the fact is, wherever we're living, this remains our home. This is where our souls are connected to. This is where we long to come back to. This is the space where the Jewish people, individually and collectively, were designed to blossom.
Thank you. Thank you very much, really, for all of that. I appreciate it, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming on and taking the time.
Thank you. And may we all see the ultimate redemption when every single last Jew will return to his or her organic and eternal home.
Amen.
And peace will reign in the world. Amen.
I hope it's before I post this recording. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you, Rabbi.
And the comments then will be, this is outdated. Fine.
There you go.
We'll both be very happy.
Thank you, Rabbi. Thanks for listening to another episode of My Israel Narrative. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to follow along and subscribe. Until next time, I'm Yisrael Chai.